Let's bring in KT McFarland, former Trump Deputy National Security Advisor. KT, great to see you this morning. It's kind of curious because it seems like Syria had been kind of quiet for a number of years, and then suddenly in the last couple of weeks, it exploded. Can you explain why that has happened over the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, all right. So Syria was governed by Assad, and he was weak and incompetent. And he was propped up in governance in Syria by Iran and by Russia, by Russian forces, by Russian military equipment, by, in some sense, Iran's money. But they're preoccupied now. As President Trump so rightfully said, Iran is preoccupied because of what Israel did to Iran and Hezbollah. And Russia is preoccupied because of Ukraine and a faltering economy. So those two guys propping up Assad, they weren't propping him up as well. And so the rebel groups, and there's not one rebel group, that's what's important to remember. There are a lot of different rebel groups. There's Turkish-backed ones, there's an ISIS Al-Qaeda rebel group. We're even in the middle of it with 900 American forces backing another rebel group. But the rebel groups got together and they saw a moment of opportunity and they moved into Syria. And so now, who knows what's next? And President Trump is so right to say, let it play out. This is not our fight. I'm just sorry we have 900 American forces in that country, because who knows, are they sitting targets? Are they potential hostages? What's their role going to be? We don't know.
I agree. Let it play out, and we shouldn't be involved. But if we're funding, Turkey is funding groups, we're funding groups, Israel's funding groups, we are involved. So now what, KD?
Well, this is where you don't know what's going to happen. So in some ways, it's a very good thing because, you know, Russia's taken down a peg and Iran has taken down a peg. Iran had used Syria to send weapons from Iran to Syria into Iran's proxy forces around Israel. So Israel's to an advantage, right? Because their adversaries are not being resupplied. Russia's down because Russia has military equipment there. Russia had a port there. So that's all good in a sense, but now you don't know what happens. It's not as if there's a unified rebel group. You could have fighting within the rebel groups. You could, on the other hand, have rebel leaders who say, you know, I see the trend in the Middle East. It's going to be peace in the Middle East. It's not Iran. We don't like Iran. We see that the future of the Middle East is Arab-Israeli peace agreements. So you could have it the other extreme. I mean, I was with Henry Kissinger, Rachel, when he did the first 1973 disengagement agreements after the 1973 Arab-Israeli war. And Syria was always the hardest nut to crack. You know, Jordan, you could figure out Jordan, you could figure out Egypt, you could figure out the Saudis, you could figure out Israel. But Syria was always the hardest nut to crack because it's not one group. It's not one ethnic group in Syria. It's many ethnic groups. It's many tribes. And Bashar al-Assad's father was Hafez al-Assad. He was head of it then. But now you have nobody in charge. Now, that's a country that's been governed by one family for, what, 60 years? Not clear what happens next.
No, all the tribes, all the different ethnic groups fighting over who's going to control this area. That is basically underneath, KT, what you mentioned a moment ago, which this becomes a mini version of the global game. Turkey, Iran, to some extent, depending on their capabilities, Russia still, and the United States. Excuse me. You mentioned Trump has said, let's stay out. He put out a statement saying, let this play out, we're going to stay out. But as Rachel and you have both said, well, we've got 900 troops already there. We've been in this game. So it seems to me that we have a choice. We either remove those 900 troops, because you pointed out they're sitting ducks, they're targets to some extent now, or we have to double down. We have to go in more or pull out. I don't know how maintaining the course is a realistic, look, we all hope for a great outcome and minimal U.S. investment. I'm just not sure that hope is a realistic hope.
Or who we're investing in. I don't know who the bad guys are, who the worst guys are in this situation, KT.
Yeah, they're bad guys, and then they're even badder guys. I've got to assume President Trump knows what he's doing. And I've got to assume that at some point there'll be an ability to protect those American forces. You know, the greater thing is you take a step back in the Middle East, what's going on? And this was something that President Trump was right about in his first term. The United States, because of our own energy, newly discovered and new technologies, we now have enough oil and natural gas to power the entire world for hundreds of years, cheaper, safer, cleaner than any other country, any other region of the world. So the Middle East has been embroiled forever, you know, going back to the days of Jesus, if not before, by just warfare between tribes. But what made it important to the rest of the world was the oil. And now that oil is far less important. Syria doesn't have any oil, but everybody else in the region does. But now that the United States can replace the Middle East, replace Russia as the world's energy hub, as we have not only energy independence, but energy dominance, that part of the world becomes a very different place. If they don't figure out, those countries don't figure out some new game, some new way of having a strong economy, they're toast. And that was the genesis of President Trump's Abraham Accords. So maybe this group, if they can figure out who's in charge of this group, maybe they can find a way to peace. Maybe they'll just keep fighting each other, and only time will tell.
Yeah, Katie, you make a great point on energy independence and just getting ourselves extricated from that part of the world, at least economically. That makes us safer for sure. You know, on the other hand, you see Donald Trump in Paris, France, meeting with Zelensky, and there's a real effort to wind down the war between Ukraine and Russia. And yet we just saw that our government, Lloyd Austin and Joe Biden, just gave $1 billion to Ukraine. So we want peace and we want to wind it down, but we just gave them $1 billion. Meanwhile, we have Americans living in tents in North Carolina.
Yeah. You know, President Trump may want to end that war, but I think the Biden administration is going out of office days is slamming the doors and trying to make that war even worse, trying to make Donald Trump's job of negotiating a solution, a negotiated solution, even harder. And you're right. It's, you know, America first means America first. What are our interests in the region? What's important to us? And we should no longer ignore the needs of the American people. For some people in a country we can't even pronounce, people can't find on a map, and we don't know, there's not a vital national interest to the United States. Ending the Ukraine war, President Trump will do it very quickly. And as you can see, Russia's on the ropes in a lot of ways, Ukraine's on the ropes. He'll negotiate a solution very quickly. But the thing about the Paris meeting that it was just stunning to me was the body language. You know, compare it to where it was when President Trump was first term. Remember that picture? President Trump had been elevated, like 30 countries were there, and he was supposed to stand at the back and at the top for the photo op, and he just elbowed his way, muscled his way down to the front row.
Love that.
Cut his cut, he said, I'm here, let's take the picture. And here you have a very different thing, right? All the world leaders are rushing to try to stand next to him, to get a photo op with him, to whisper in his ear. You know, Donald Trump, America is so back. It's great to see.
As you know better than anybody, KT, Donald Trump, you know, most people would look at this situation and see and be overwhelmed by all of the challenges facing our country. And Donald Trump is one of those guys, he looks at that as an opportunity. The more moving parts, the more you can negotiate.
Yeah.
You know, we're New Yorkers. I'm a New Yorker. Donald Trump has had a reputation for 40 years as being one of the best negotiator deal guys in New York and in the country. And he's shown in his first term, even with, you know, the Russia investigation and the impeachment and the, you know, deep state, even then he was able to get Abraham Accords. He was able to get trade agreements with China. He was able to do an awful lot. And so now that he'll be unencumbered, I think, by a lot of that, you know, sky's the limit. America is going to be in such great shape under President Trump. It's going to be our golden era.
All right, KT. Well, thank you for joining us this morning. Great to have you.
Thanks, KT.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.